Compete to run the most successful railway company possible, building rail lines between cities, stations along the way, and delivering the goods they demand. All driven by bag building and strategic decisions. We'll cover all that and more as we learn Lightning Train, the 1 to 4 player game from Direwolf, who helped sponsor this video. The game is very strategic but easy to play once you've learned the basic round structure and what you can do on your turn. But first, let's get it all set up so you can get a better sense of the game before learning how to play. Start by placing the main board in the center of the table with the appropriate side for your player count. We're setting up for a 3-player game, so we're using this side. Find the Lightning Train market token and place it on the 25-point space of the score track. Then add starting goods to 7 specific cities so that each has 2 of their corresponding goods. Crops for Sacramento and Raleigh, gold in Deadwood, cattle in St. Louis, textiles in Toronto, passengers in New York City, and steel in Pittsburgh. Place the remaining goods tokens in a supply next to the game board. Next, take all the market chips and shuffle them into a face-down supply next to the game board as well. You can recognize them by this icon on their backs. Reveal market chips one at a time and add them to the board in the leftmost space of their corresponding compartment. The markings at the bottom edge of each chip will show you which compartment they should be placed in. In the event that a compartment is already full when placing another chip, simply set it aside and draw another. Continue this process until you've added 6 chips to the market, and then take any of those that you set aside and return them to the game box. And note that these rules for placing chips are only used for setup. It is handled slightly differently throughout the game, which we'll cover shortly. To finish off the market, stack 6 of these chips off the board next to the 2 money compartment, and place all of the loan chips in the bank to the left of the market. Separate the station tokens by size, and shuffle them face down into 2 supplies next to the game board. Randomly select a card from the setup deck, and then reveal and place stations of the matching size in the corresponding cities. For example, this setup card has us adding large stations to San Francisco, New Orleans, Vancouver, as well as Kansas City since we're playing with 3 players. And small stations to Billings, Tombstone, and Louisville. Finally, place a neutral station marker on top of each of these stations. From the remaining station markers, reveal 2 more of each size and place them in the spaces on the game board next to the bank. Once you've situated all of the stations on the game board, you can return the setup cards to the game box, and then grab the action deck and the mogul deck. Shuffle each deck separately and place them near the game board. If this is your first game, it's recommended that you remove these 4 mogul cards, which are marked as advanced along the bottom. Then deal 2 mogul cards to each player. These will be kept secret until they're revealed during the game, and we'll cover more on these in a bit. Give each player a helper card, and then move on to having everybody set up their player space. Each player takes a company board and places it in front of them, and their industrialize and go public boards go along the bottom with these sides face up. Players should take 48 train and 6 locomotive chips matching their board's color and keep them as separate supplies. Place the 6 station markers in their color on the station slots of their company board, as well as a set of these 4 power chips. And note that the order of these chips doesn't matter. Next, players will fill their bags with 10 chips, 3 basic trains from their supply, and these 7 starting chips that each player should have. You'll see that all of these chips have a money value on them. 1 also has a lightning train, and 3 of them also serve as contracts, which I'll explain in more detail shortly. Each player mixes all 10 chips in their bag, draws 5 at random, and places them in the 5 basic slots of their boarding area. And for now, you can ignore these 2 slots marked with the plus symbol. And if a player draws all 3 of their starting contracts, or none of them, they return all 5 chips to the bag and redraw until it doesn't happen. Here's an example of what your boarding area might look like at this point. In this case, a lightning train symbol is drawn. This is important and is the name of the game after all. Whenever a lightning train icon is triggered, as it would be when adding it to your boarding area, Take one basic train chip from your personal supply and place it in the lightning zone of your boarding area. And note that this space has no slots, so you may place any number of lightning trains here during a turn. Everyone places their score marker on the starting space of the score track and then randomly determine a first player who will remain the first player for the duration of the game. That player shuffles the production deck and returns 3 cards to the box without looking at them. Then they place the remaining 12-card deck in front of them. Finally, the first and second players take 2 delivery tokens, and all other players take 1 delivery token and 1 that allows for a delivery or serves as a contract. Lightning Train is played over an undetermined number of rounds, and each round follows 3 steps, starting with revealing a production card. The first player reveals the top card of the deck, which usually tells you to add 2 goods to the game board. In this case, you would add 2 oil goods tokens to Calgary and then discard the card. The second step is to award subsidies. Now, this really won't happen in the first round, but it is an important step throughout the game, especially when players start scoring points. So I'll explain it now. Check every player's position on the score track, which you'll note is divided into zones of alternating shades. These are called subsidy tiers. For each complete tier between a player and the leader, they take 1 lightning train, up to a maximum of 2. And after those 2 things are taken care of, the third step is for players to take their turns, starting with the first player and proceeding clockwise. Each player turn has 2 phases, the operations phase and the turnover phase. Let's start with the operations phase. This is when you'll make decisions for your railway company by taking a variety of actions in any order you choose. Actions can be taken more than once unless a limit is specified. A rail line is a series of train chips played on an empty path between 2 cities. Building a rail line is limited to once per turn and has the following 4 requirements. First, you must have a contract for the region where you're building. If the path crosses a region boundary, a contract for either region will work. Here are some examples of contract chips, and you just need to have 1 present in your boarding area in order to utilize it. In addition to contract chips, there are some other ways for securing contracts, which we'll go over shortly. And it should be noted, it can be easy to forget about needing a contract, so just be sure to confirm that you have the right contract for where you're building your rail line. You must be able to fill every slot of the path using train chips. These will typically come from your boarding area, but if you have a station in a city on either end of the rail line, you may take and use 1 and only 1 basic train from your supply. The rail line must have a direct connection to at least one of the following. One of the starting cities on the eastern seaboard, marked with this sunrise icon, a city where you already have a station, or connected to one of your existing rail lines. Finally, if it's a mountain path marked with brown slots like these, you must be able to tunnel by having at least 1 tunnel icon this turn. This icon might be found on a chip in your boarding area, on an action card that you've played, or by taking the Use Explosives Railyard action, which I'll explain shortly. And if you meet all 4 of those requirements, simply place the train chips in the slots of the path. And if there are any little star icons in the slots at the ends of the path, score 1 point for each icon on one of the ends. For example, this rail line would score 2 points. As you score points, you're going to move your marker along the score track, and note that certain things will happen when you reach or pass certain scores. For points with this icon, choose one of the power chips on your company board and move it to your warehouse. This happens at 3, 10, and 15 points. This icon has you draw an action card and add it to your hand. And when you trigger this icon, if you have at least 1 card of any type in your hand, draw a card from either the mogul or action deck. Then discard any card from your hand, and it can even be the one that you just drew. Finally, the first time any player reaches 25 points, move this lightning train market token to the 4 money compartment. Now, for the rest of the game, any player may spend 4 money on their turn to take a lightning train. And in the event a player passes 100 points, they do not claim any of these rewards again. Another action you can take on your turn is to make a delivery. A delivery uses a series of rail lines to move goods to a city that wants them, from the closest connected producer city. You can make any number of deliveries on your turn, but each delivery requires either one of these venture icons on a chip in your boarding area or on an action card you've played this turn, or spending one of the delivery tokens you received during setup, returning it to the box. To make a delivery, follow these 4 steps in order. Choose a station with at least one goods request. If the station has 2 requests, simply choose one. Then identify the closest connected producer city that has a face-up goods token matching the request. Connected means that there must be an unbroken route of rail lines between the 2 cities, and these can belong to any player. Closest means that you must use the fewest number of rail lines possible. If there's a tie, use the route with the most locomotive chips, and if there's still a tie, simply choose between the tied options. Next, award points for the route. For each rail line along the route, its owner scores 1 point. And if the destination city has a player's marker on it, that player scores 1 point as well. For example, delivering cattle to Omaha from St. Louis would score 1 point for blue and 3 points for green. Finally, take the goods token from the producer city and put it face down on the station, covering the corresponding goods request. Each request can only be met once per game, so keep that in mind as you build your rail lines and your stations. But before I explain building stations, let's talk about assigning trains to your rail yard. Your rail yard consists of 6 different areas on your company board, each with its own action. There are slots for chips in each area, and each slot may hold 1 train chip, basic or locomotive. To assign a train chip to your rail yard, move it from your boarding area to an empty slot on one of your Railyard actions. Note that you cannot assign a train chip to some actions until you've built the required number of stations, 1 station for these and 2 stations for these. To actually take a Railyard action, you're simply going to spend the required number of train chips from the action and move them to your warehouse. And it's important to note that you're not required to take a Railyard action once you have chips assigned to it. You can leave them there until you want to take the action, even on a future turn. Once a train chip is assigned to a Railyard action, though, it cannot be moved except by spending it to take the action. And note that you cannot end your operations phase while you still have any train chips in your boarding area and an empty slot in your rail yard where you could assign them. Now let's explain those actions, starting with line storage, which really isn't an action on its own. When building a rail line like we explained earlier, you can use a train chip stored here as part of that rail line. So effectively, it's like a little extra storage to use on a future turn. Building a station is probably one of the more commonly used actions in your rail yard. You can only take this action once per turn, and at most 6 times throughout the whole game, as indicated by your available station markers across the top of your company board. And there are 2 requirements for building a station. You must have a contract for the region where you're building the station, much like how contracts are needed for building rail lines. In fact, the same contract can be used to build a station and a rail line during the same turn. And secondly, each city shows a cost to build there. So you must spend that many train chips from this Railyard action. And if you happen to build a station that costs fewer train chips than you have assigned there, simply leave the unused ones in their slots to use on a future turn. As long as you meet both of these requirements, choose a face-up station of the appropriate size from one of the slots next to the bank and move it to the city where you're building. Next, take the leftmost station marker from your company board and place it on top of the station. And if the marker came from a space showing a reward, gain it immediately. Then refill the empty slot next to the bank with a new station token of the same size from the supply. As I mentioned earlier, there are other ways of having the contracts that you need, and one of those is to take the secure contract action. You may spend 2 chips from here to in effect gain a contract for any one region for the rest of your turn. And remember, you must have built at least 1 station in order to assign chips to this action or the next. Use explosives. You may spend 2 chips from this action for one of 2 effects. It will allow you to tunnel this turn, so you can build rail lines on mountain paths, or it can allow you to build one additional rail line this turn. And since you can take actions in any order, you could even spend trains from here, refill it, and then take the action again. So you could tunnel and build an extra rail line, or maybe even build 3 rail lines. The last Railyard action is to industrialize or go public. Both of these require you to have built at least 2 stations before you can assign train chips to their slots. When you industrialize, you spend 2 train chips from this action to flip your industrialized board to the other side. This can only be done once per game, and now you have 2 more of these types of slots in your boarding area. I'll explain more about how that works in a moment, but industrializing generally allows for using even more chips on future turns. When you go public, you can spend 3 chips from this action to flip your go public board to the other side. This also can only be done once per game, and now your railway is a public company, and you can enjoy a couple new benefits. This means you can take a lightning train for each venture icon you have, which can really help increase your number of train chips. The other benefit means that whenever you generate 7 money or more on a turn, you immediately score 2 points. Both of these benefits will be in effect on all future turns, but also immediately on the same turn that you flip the board. Another action you can take is to play action and upgrade cards, but these will remain secret in your hand until you choose to play them. An action card immediately gives you something when you play it. Simply take the benefit and then place it in the discard pile near the action deck. For example, Fast Track lets you take a lightning train, and then you may build 1 additional rail line this turn. An upgrade card is played face up next to your company board and gives you an ongoing benefit for the rest of the game. Keep in mind that most upgrade cards have a station requirement. For example, you would need to have built 3 stations in order to play the revenue stream upgrade, which gives you +1 money each turn. And so far, you've heard money referenced, you've probably seen it on some chips, but now it's time to learn how you can spend it. With this action, you buy new chips from the market. Begin by adding up the money values on all the chips in your boarding area. This is the total amount of money you can spend this turn. You may buy as many chips as you can afford, but any money you don't spend is lost at the end of your turn. And remember that if you've trashed a chip out of the game this turn, you still get any money value on it to spend this turn. The cost of a chip in the market is determined by the compartment it is currently in. When you pay this cost, take the chip and place it in your warehouse. Most chips do nothing when you first gain them, but if you gain a chip with a conductor icon, immediately take a locomotive from your personal supply and place it in your warehouse as well. And if there's a chip that you really want but you're just a little short on cash, you can take 1 loan from the bank for 1 extra money on that same turn. Take a loan chip from the bank and place it in your warehouse. You now have 1 extra money to spend this turn. You can only take a loan once per turn, and only if the bank has a loan chip. That chip will eventually make its way into your bag and potentially make future turns a little less efficient, but loans can be paid off. If you have a loan chip in your boarding area, it does nothing. But you may spend 4 money to return it to the bank, which is a good idea since a loan chip you still have at the end of the game is worth -2 points. Note also that taking a loan does not help you trigger bankroll effects like the one on your Go Public board and on some chips and cards. And remember when buying chips to restock the market after each chip purchased. There must always be 6 slots in the market filled with chips. So if there's ever fewer, reveal one from the general supply and add it to the market. Each market chip has markings on the bottom edge to represent its initial cost. Place the chip in the leftmost empty slot of that compartment. If all slots in a compartment are full, create an empty slot for it by sliding each chip there on a slot to the left, possibly causing a chain reaction sliding even more chips to the left. In this way, the cost of a chip in the market may decrease if forced out of its initial compartment. And if a chip is ever forced left out of the 1 money compartment, simply trash it out of the game. There are a few other actions on chips that you might be able to take during your turn, and you can find the details for those icons that trigger those actions on the back of the rulebook. And remember, once again, you can take any of these actions in any order you want, so it really gives you a lot of flexibility to try to make things happen. And once your operations phase is over, it's time to move on to the turnover phase. Start by emptying your boarding area. First, and this is important, if you used any starting contract chips to build this turn, choose one of those that you used and trash it out of the game. Next, move all remaining chips from your boarding area to your warehouse. Finally, refill your boarding area by drawing chips at random from your bag one at a time, placing each chip on an empty slot in your boarding area. Each regular chip you draw must be placed in one of the 5 basic slots. And now we get to learn about those chips with the little plus symbol in the upper left corner. If you draw one of these chips, place it instead in one of the 2 corresponding slots. And remember, if you flipped your industrialized board over, you'll have 4 of these slots. If all those available slots are full when you draw one of these chips, just place the chip in a basic slot instead. And no matter what, stop drawing chips immediately once all 5 of the basic slots of your boarding area are full. And don't forget to trigger any lightning train icons that you might have drawn. Note that you also get a lightning train for every 2 conductor hats that you have in your boarding area as well. And of course, whenever you need to draw a chip from your bag and find that it's empty, take all the chips from your warehouse, put them in your bag, mix them up, and continue drawing. To keep the game moving, the next player can start their operations phase while the last player finishes their turnover phase. Play continues clockwise, pausing at the first player each round for another production card and awarding subsidies. At some point during the game, the Transcontinental Railroad might be established. This happens the moment there is an unbroken route of rail lines connecting New York City to San Francisco. And at that moment, the current player's turn is paused for scoring this route. Determine the route of the Transcontinental Railroad as if making a delivery from New York City to San Francisco, using the fewest number of rail lines possible and breaking ties as we discussed earlier. Unlike deliveries though, this time rail lines do not score points, but locomotives on the route will score 2 points each. The current player then resumes their turn, but also triggers the last call for stations. The current round is the last one in which players can build a station. Eventually, one of 2 things will trigger the end of the game. If the Transcontinental Railroad has been established and has specific cities connected to it, the end of the game will be triggered. In a game with 3 or fewer players, either Houston or Seattle must be connected to it. And in a 4-player game, both must be connected. This could happen at some round after the Transcontinental is established or in the very same moment if the required cities are already connected. Either way, players will finish the current round and then play one more final round. Alternatively, the game ends immediately at the end of round 12, which is signified by the 12-card production deck being empty. After the end of the final round, each player at the table can make one final delivery, starting with the first player and proceeding clockwise. No venture icon or delivery token is needed for this final delivery, but when it's your turn, you can spend those to make additional deliveries. And then it's time to score. Each player now loses 2 points for each lone chip that they still have anywhere in their bag, boarding area, or warehouse. Then each player reveals and scores all of their goal cards, which is the more common type of mogul card you might have. For example, this goal card scores 3, 5, or 7 points, depending on how many cities in the Northwest region your rail lines connect to. And after all the lone chips and goal cards are accounted for, the player with the most points wins. And there is no tiebreaker in this case, so if there are players tied for the most points, they share the victory. And that is how you play Lightning Train. There are some special rules for solo and 2-player games, so be sure to check the rules for those details. But if you have any questions at all about this how to play, please ask in the comments below and I'll get down there and answer whatever I possibly can. Until next time, make sure everyone has fun at the table, and we'll see you then.